All right, so welcome to the Village Central Teaching, CT as we call it. Feel free to find a seat, spread out as you will. We ask that you leave your masks on if you could during the meeting. Um, yeah, so our website, if you're new or even if you're not new and you just want to check it out, you never have, there it is, villageocn.com. Latest Central Teachings posted there. So if you want to get to our YouTube channel, that's an easy way to do it. Go through there, and then you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and have access to the archives of all these various central teachings on the Bible. Um, Also, there's essays on there about everything from our philosophy of ministry to women's role in ministry and what the Bible has to say about that, even what the Bible has to say about profanity, the Lord's Supper, other things like that. So you might want to check that out. We're doing a series called The Politics of Jesus, and obviously a very timely series. And we spent our first, I think it was 3 weeks or so, looking at what the Bible has to say in general about politics, what politics is, what does the Bible have to say about government, the role of government, the purpose and God's design for government. And then these last few teachings, we've been focusing on the book, some snapshots, if you will, from the book, the Old Testament book of Daniel. The reason we did that is because if we're going to healthily and hopefully engage with this topic of politics, how to engage in our world, etc., we've got to broaden our gaze. I think it's way too easy. I think you guys probably feel it as much as I do to get our gaze narrowed down into being upset because our candidate didn't get elected or he or she did get elected. And it's just so easy to get our focus on the world's value system and all of the hoopla that goes along with that. So what we're doing when we look at Daniel is we're going back literally to events that occurred 2,700 years ago. But it was a group of guys, young men, Daniel and three friends, who were drug away as captives uh, and from their homeland in Judah, southern part of the nation of Israel, and they were drug away into Babylon. And so they had some of the worst political environment that you could possibly imagine. They had no choice, no vote, and they're being basically brainwashed to try to adopt the Babylonian worldview and become people who play a political role uh, within that worldview and within that society. So they're teenagers, teenage boys. And so today, I think fittingly, I put this today, and I think it's a good place to put it in light of the election. So it fits also with the flow of Daniel. So what we're going to focus on today is wise, impatient protests, and how did Daniel live within the world that he was in, but not become like the world that he was in the sense of adopting its value system. How did he protest against it in a wise way? And some really insightful stuff. So let me pray for us, and then we're going to jump in here. So, God, thank you for Daniel. Thank you that you are God and we can trust you. Thank you that you are here with us and that you have created each and every one of us in this room and people who are zooming in and who will watch this later. You've created each and every one of us, given us personhood, identity, critical thinking skills, creativity, various other things. But ultimately, you've created us as personal, relational beings, and you've created us for a relationship with you. And we just won't ever be fully satisfied until we enter into relationship with you through what Jesus has done for us, bridging that gap between us and you because of our sins. So if we've already accepted you, help us just be filled with gratitude for your love, your grace. If we haven't accepted you, I pray that you would just help us take that next step in thinking about it, examining the evidence, and maybe even taking the step of accepting what Christ has done for us even this morning. Amen. Okay, so I want to quote again. I keep doing this, but I think he says it so well. John Lennox, Oxford professor, mathematician, philosopher of science, and a theologian. He says this in his kind of book commentary on the book of Daniel, called Against the Flow, he says, what makes the story of Daniel and his friends, what makes the story of their faith remarkable is that they did not simply continue the private devotion to God that they had developed in their homeland, which they had developed that. They had put in time getting to know God. They put in time getting to know God's word that they had at the time period. They put in time trying to live for God. Evidence would show us as we read through the book. But they moved beyond that. But that also prepared them for what they were going, the difficulties, the suffering they were going to experience. They not only maintained that private devotion to God, but they maintained a high-profile public witness in a pluralistic society that became increasingly antagonistic to their faith. I think similar to the society we live in, it's increasingly antagonistic not only to Christianity and the claim that Jesus is the only way to God, but it's even increasingly antagonistic to the idea of truth, there being a authoritative truth in anything other than scientific realms, anything other than what can be proven in a laboratory, which of course science is awesome, and what can be proven in laboratories is awesome, and we benefit from that. But the claim that there's other truth, like moral truth, like truth about history even, and that there's truth about who we are, what we're designed for, it's been on the chopping block for a long time. So what does Daniel have to say to us, or what does God have to say to us through Daniel? So let's pick back up some things we've already read, but to remind us and set the stage and get us ready for today. So the king, this is after Daniel and his three buddies and others. There were others with them, but we highlight Daniel and his three friends are highlighted. Remember, they're teenagers, 15, 16 years old or so, boys, young men, if you will. So the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his court officials, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and from the nobility, young men without any physical defect, good looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom and knowledge, perceptive and capable of serving in the king's palace, and to teach them the Chaldean, or that's Babylonian, language and literature. So right there, let me highlight that. Various things are going to be mentioned here, and I've touched on them in other teachings, but we need to remember them again. These men, young men, are being drug off to be trained to be Babylonian representatives to help rule, to be officials over the Israelite people and to serve in the Babylonian court. But to do that, King Nebuchadnezzar has to trust them. They need to adopt his view of the world. And so to help them adopt his view of the world and enforce his policies and all that, first off, he starts with language. Language is simply, study after study shows this. Language, the vocabulary we have and that we're trained with in whatever society we grow up in, it fundamentally shapes and is shaped by our view of reality. Many of you know I've mentioned this before. My wife and I lived in China for a couple of years. We were there to befriend Chinese, specifically Chinese university students, get to know the culture, learn the language, and also to share our lives and to share about our faith in Jesus Christ with Chinese people. This happened in the late 90s for a couple of years. And so I experienced this truth, two sides of it. For one, like when we started to get to know Chinese friends and tried to explain their need for a savior, that they were separated from a holy God, first they didn't have any concept. Their language, the Chinese language, didn't have a word for holy. Their word for God meant different things than what the word for God typically means in the Western world, the last several hundred years at least. And they didn't have a word for sin at all. Like that concept did not exist. So that forced us to get creative. Actually, it was really good because you throw the word sin out in our culture and people immediately have heard it, of course. And so they infuse it with whatever their definition or understanding of sin is, which oftentimes is askew of what it actually means. So we actually had to work to explain what sin was like say if they were reading the Bible with us, their Chinese translation and what it would say, it's like it was always a confusing term to them. And so it's like sin ultimately is about a breach of relationship. It's us choosing to rebel against God, our creator, and to go our own way. And when we chose to go our own way, there was a breach, a broken relationship that occurred. Chinese culture is built on relationships, familial relationships, relationships with the nation. Uh, you get things done through who you know. Yes, that happens here. It happens in China on steroids, on top of steroids, on top of steroids. Relationships matter. So that connected with them. But we had to, their view of reality and of the concept of the possibility of a higher power and our potential relationship to him was shaped by their language. Now, I was also shaped as I started studying the Chinese language and living in a culture that's where all I heard all around me was Chinese day after day after day after day after day after day after day, which was really helpful for the language. It was also really difficult at times, etc. I won't go into all of it, but you can tell when you're starting to be shaped by study of a foreign language and you're starting to really become more fluent in that language, they always say, whenever you start dreaming in that language. And I started dreaming in Chinese a lot of times. I still do every now and then. It's crazy. But my view of reality, my view of my homeland, my American society, was shaped by my experience of Chinese culture, being out of my culture, yes, but also by Chinese language and etc. So that's a long explanation personally for what really Nebuchadnezzar and his officials were trying to do. They were trying to reshape the way Daniel and his friends thought about everything, reshape their worldview. The next thing, in addition to the language, he assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and from the wine that he drank. So that just sounds real simple. Okay, give him good food, give him good drinks. But it's not just about that. What this is about, what's on the table here is a question. Does having the best material goods, which Nebuchadnezzar would say these are provided by our gods, great rituals would go into every time they ate, thanking the gods, the Babylonian gods, etc. Our gods are better than the other gods. Our gods are better than the Israelite gods because we kicked the Israelites' butt and we got you guys captive. So the question is, does having the best material goods lead to a successful life? That's what's on the table. And he's trying to get Daniel and his friends to adopt that. They're to be trained for 3 years. At the end of that time, they're to serve in the king's court. And we'll see that 3-year span covered in just a few verses here in a little bit. Among them, from the descendants of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are our 4 guys, Daniel being the chief one. The chief official gave them other names. He gave Belteshazzar to Daniel, Shadrach to Hananiah, Meshach to Mishael, and Abednego to Azariah. So that's how they're typically known if you grew up in church. Daniel, for some reason, he gets to keep his Hebrew name the way we know him. The other guys, we know them by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So on the chopping block or on the table, the question on the table in this book is, will these young teenagers be able to resist this incredible molding pressure, this assault of the world's value system, of the Babylonian value system? I taught last week about how Babylon throughout the Bible represents not only Babylon, the nation, or the people here led by Nebuchadnezzar, but Babylon represents the values of the world system. Boiled down simply, finding your value, your identity, and your pursuit in stuff, status, and sensuality. That's what's on the chopping block, or I keep saying that's the wrong term. That's the question that's on the table. That's what I mean. And we're going to chop the question, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, so to resist and protest against such a pervasive force going on all around them, Daniel and his friends had to be able to diagnose what was going on and understand the fruits of the system. They couldn't just do it by sheer willpower alone. So to summarize last week a little bit, the Babylonian, or what is still currently a very predominant worldview in our world, the naturalistic worldview, that is that all there is what is natural. All there is stuff. All there is material things. It begins with an impersonal, non-moral beginning. We looked at their text last week. I'm not just making this up. It's right there in the ancient Near Eastern text. Everything came from primordial, unformed, chaotic soup. And the gods were created out of material goods, processes. This leads, over time, the scriptures would indicate, to confuse people, because we experience that we're persons. We experience that we want to relate as individuals, that we have free will, that we have the ability to make decisions, that what we do matters. But when you start with, when the claim is, at least, that the creation of everything was something impersonal and non-moral, then it's like, so how did we get from that soup to us? And what is life all about? What does it mean? So we have identity issues that come from the Babylonian or the naturalistic, modern, materialistic worldview. And then it leads to, because we're confused about who we are, because we're confused about origins, where everything came from, it leads to then, of course, confused living. Confusion about, is there meaning? Is there right and wrong that's authoritative for all people in all places, regardless of what the heck we think about it? Yeah. So that's kind of a summary of last week. So to spot a counterfeit, you've got to be super familiar with the real deal. And Daniel and his friends they knew and had been trained there is a personal, moral creator who created humanity in his image. This led to them having a stable identity, not only knowing who created them, but a stable identity, having a relationship with this personal God. And this led to secure living. They were able to withstand great onslaughts against their views. And yeah, we'll see in the book, they go through some literal torture, and their lives are in danger. So in addition to such mental clarity, in addition to all this, what you could call intellectual stuff that appeals to some of us, and some of us are like, good Lord, we're ready to stop talking about worldviews. Can we move on? Simple, courageous daily decisions based on our worldview, of course, are necessary if we're going to change. And if we're going to change the world around us, and if we're not going to be changed by it. So Daniel has to make these choices. So here we go. Daniel 1, verse 8. Now we're into new territory. Daniel determined that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. He had access to the best food and drink around. It's like, Daniel, it's a free buffet. It's an open bar. Man, what's the deal? So what's wrong with enjoying some good food and drink? Well, there isn't anything necessarily, within moderation, of course. And Jesus actually speaks against this. He gives a different perspective on this. Mark 7, I'll give you the context for this in a second. Let's just see what Jesus said. When Jesus went into the house away from the crowd, the disciples asked him about the parable he had just told. And he said to them, are you also as lacking in understanding? Love it when he says that. It's kind of like, you guys like dumb? Don't you realize that nothing going into a man or a person from the outside can defile him, can like make him morally impure? Doesn't matter what you eat isn't going to make you somehow unacceptable in God's sight. For it doesn't go into his heart, but into the stomach, and it's eliminated. Yeah, it comes out as poop or other things. Pee, I guess. Hopefully those are only two options. As a result, he made all foods clean. Then he said, what comes out of a person, that defiles him. So here's the key thing here, though. You got to understand context. Jesus says these things about, you read that in isolation, and it could be like, eat, drink whatever you want, and as much of whatever you want as you can, and it don't matter at all. But what Jesus is doing here, he's correcting this legalistic Jewish worldview that righteousness had to do with, or us earning God's approval, has to do with eating and drinking the right things. So Jesus is resisting this false teaching in Jewish culture. He's saying, no, that's silly. Our choices are what separate us from God. Food doesn't get into our hearts, into our will. That's the thing we need to deal with, instead of just making sure we eat the right thing or drink the right thing or don't drink the wrong thing or don't eat the wrong thing. So the question could be asked, by determining he's not going to eat this stuff, is Daniel being a legalist? Is Daniel going against Jesus' teaching? Well, he has a different context. From what I said earlier here, the issue in Daniel's situation is the need. He's not correcting the form of legalism that Jesus was correcting. He's needing to correct the view that the gods, the Babylonian gods especially, and the choice food and drink they provide are the source of prosperity. So that's what he is there, against his will, drug into this foreign land, but he's there, he's committed to represent the one true God, even in hostile territory. And he needs to start off on a base level with correcting this view that the gods, see, look at all the great food and drink they provide. And Daniel's going to put that to the test. In our culture, I was thinking about this, so what are some of the issues in our situation that need to be corrected, that we might need to determine to resist in some way, to show contrast with our world? I don't know that it's so much on what we eat or what we drink. I mean, of course not overindulging in whatever we eat or drink is an issue for sure. But one of the issues in our situation, I would say, is the need to correct the view that the economy, people just throw that word around like crazy. I'm always like, so what, define economy for me? It's just like this idea of the economy. It's all about the economy. This view that the economy and the choice food and drink that it provides is the source of prosperity. So if you're a follower of Jesus, one area, I would say we need to not defile ourselves and to resist and be different than our culture is by not putting all our hopes in the economy or in material goods and stuff and status that comes with that, and sensuality as well. What does that look like? Heck of a question, $1 million question, and you got to work it out in real life, in the context of a community, walking through it. It doesn't mean that we don't have any material goods, because that would be actually impossible. But where is our hope? What do we get worked up about? One of the other issues, and this is a very current one, and this fits the times today and with our series, one of the other issues in our situation is the need to correct the view that our political party, whatever that might be, and the choice food and drink that it provides or says it provides or claims that it provides, whether or not it actually did provide it or not, is the source of prosperity. We got a prime time opportunity right now to resist that kind of partisan thinking and talking and posting and interacting. It's just, if you are a follower of Christ, I urge you to use some self-control in how you talk about your views of whatever election or whatever elected official you are talking about. I'm not telling you have to be excited or you have to hide your excitement or whatever. But yeah, if finding out that Biden is, at least until we get through a very messy potential process, is the president-elect, led to incredible, unbounded, joyful glee beyond what you've experienced relating to God or anything else for a long time, I'm not going to tell you shouldn't be excited about Biden being elected if you were voting for him, but I'm saying you might want to check and see, do you get as excited about the things that are going to actually last forever? About Jesus and what he's about? Or if you're just like a ticked off rage monster because Trump didn't get elected. And maybe you're surrounded by others, and it's so easy to tweet, post, get engaged in discussions, tearing down the other side. I urge you to examine when is the level to which you're upset about Trump losing is, do you have the same level of emotional angst over people being far from God, over your own sin struggles, over your need for God, over the things of God that are not fully what they should be yet in this world? Fill it in. Yeah, we've got things that need to be corrected, and we have a prime time to do it, especially in this area of not having all our hopes in a particular political party. Okay, so Daniel determined that he would not defile himself. He made a conscious line in the sand commitment decision that he's not going to eat this stuff and drink this stuff. Not because there's something inherently wrong with the stuff, but the stuff represented a worldview that the Babylonian gods were supreme, and he did not want to reinforce that. So how is he going to do it? How is he going to wisely and patiently protest against a worldview and that worldview's leadership, most powerful man in the world, in that part of the world anyway, Nebuchadnezzar, and then the political policies that he did not agree with? We're all going to have some of those. If you find yourself agreeing with every political policy that comes down the pipe, I would argue maybe you have been thoroughly brainwashed, no matter which political policies come down the pipe. I mean, who cares what the source is? We live in a fallen world, and political policies are never going to be perfect. So, how's Daniel going to resist these things and yet still be able to relationally engage with people? Well, Daniel thinks it through, as he had a tendency to do. Remember, he's a teenager. He's not a 65-year-old wise sage. He becomes older and wise. I mean, probably gray-haired, all that stuff. But he's young right now. What he determines, he's not going to do that, drink that stuff. But notice one thing that is not included in the text that he didn't do. There's other, it's kind of inferred here that some of the other Jewish young men who were drug off into exile with Daniel and his friends did partake. But notice that he didn't go on the attack against the other young trainees who were eating and drinking. Maybe he had private conversations trying to persuade them. There's nothing in the text that he did much about it. He made his own commitment. He didn't create a national Babylonian organization dedicated to the eliminating, eating, and drinking of the king's food either, to resist these policies and the worldview and the leader that he did not support, who probably oversaw or at least allowed the killing of his parents as well. Could have been very bitter. No, he decided he's not going to drink. He's not going to eat. And then what's he do next? He does something very simple but very wise. He asks permission from the chief official not to defile himself, from his perspective, not to eat food, those things, associate himself with the Babylonian gods. So what does he do? I mean, a really simple thing. He politely and privately asks his supervisor for permission not to eat this food and drink. He tries that tactic first on a personal level. And take note here, God had granted Daniel favor and compassion from the chief official. Where did that favor and compassion come from? Well, as we observe the rest of Daniel's life, I'm sure at least part of it came in answer to Daniel's prayers. Daniel prayed for the chief official, prayed for favor and compassion from him. God answered that prayer. My suspicion also, watching the way Daniel related to this chief official and others who were put as overseers over him throughout the whole book of Daniel is he also cultivated a personal relationship with this chief official, someone who was opposed to him, someone he didn't agree with, someone who was on the other side of the policy divide, the other party, if you will. He built a relationship, and then he went and had a conversation with someone that he had got to know. Verse 10, yet the chief official, said to Daniel, my lord, the king assigned your food and drink. It was a command from on high. There's no options. I'm afraid of what would happen if he saw your faces looking thinner than those of the other young men your age. And he's like, it's going to be obvious. Like, if you don't eat this really awesome stuff, you're going to look sickly, thin. And in a culture where a sign of health was having extra weight on your body, he'd be like, no, what's going on with these guys? They don't make the cut. You're out. And those who are overseeing you, they're out too. So yeah, he says, you would endanger my life with the king. It's absolutely true. The chief official would have been putting himself on the line if he agreed to Daniel's proposal. And so the text doesn't really tell us that's the end of it. That's the end of their discussion. But all indications are he did not approve it because of what Daniel has to do next. So, of course, this chief official who's steeped in the Babylonian worldview, who doesn't know and doesn't believe in the one true God who created the heavens and the earth and wanted a personal relationship with him, of course he would think this way. Of course. He knows of no other potential outcome. You don't eat this stuff, you're not going to look good, and it ain't going to be good for me. It's going to be real bad for me. And my life will be in danger, and so will yours, Daniel. This points to a principle, really. So Daniel's here, and I'll point this out in a little bit. He's here not only to resist these false gods, he sees his mission as representing the one true God in the midst of hostile territory. And so Daniel doesn't get into it's not included, at least in the text. He doesn't get into some big argument with the official. He doesn't, call him a sinner and start throwing stuff at him or whatever. No, what he does is he realizes, okay, this guy's not yet ready yet. He's not yet ready to adopt this plan. And it points to a principle is that people need time and patient interaction as they wrestle with God's claims. I know I did. Many of you guys know my story. I'll tell it in a short form here. So, grew up unchurched. Once I got to be older, like Daniel's age, actually, high school or late high school, and then on into early college, I was at best agnostic. I wouldn't say whether there was or was not a God, probably leaning more towards atheist. They're saying there is no God. And then I had friends around me who were Christians who would try to persuade me to go to church while we were out getting trash together and stuff on Saturday Night Live. We weren't on Saturday Night Live, on Saturday night. And I'm like, we're all going to feel like crap in the morning. You guys will be trying not to throw up in the pew. I'm going to be in my bed. That'll be a lot better situation. So obviously there's no difference between you and me. So why would I go to your church? But over the course of time, slowly, through different circumstances and through some minor suffering, really, but some difficulty in my life, and then just the questions you start asking as a teenager, college student, college-age person, I started to wonder, what's this all about? What's the purpose of life, etc. But I needed people around me who would patiently answer my questions. And thank God he provided several people who sought to answer my questions, who helped me find resources, who would read the Bible with me and explain what the heck is Jesus talking about here and here and here and here and here and here. Like every sentence, it's like, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. But over time, I started to become persuaded by this person, Jesus. And eventually, I accepted him as my Savior. So I needed time. People need time. Verse 11. So Daniel, the chief official, said basically no. Even though we're friends, Daniel, I can't go this far. I can't do you this big of a favor. So Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief official had assigned to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink, which would have sounded extremely paltry. Even it sounds paltry to me as well. That would be hard for 10 days to only eat vegetables, only drink water. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food. Compare us, compare and contrast, and then deal with your servants based on what you see. So Daniel goes to the guard. He goes down the pecking order, but closer in terms of the person he interacts with daily, in terms of his protest and his resistance against this political regime. So he goes to the guard. Daniel isn't easily deterred. Still goes to creative personal option. And notice what he does. He doesn't say, just trust me, God's real, come on, get over yourself. He doesn't do that. He says, please test, please, and then examine, and then deal with what you observe. In other words, he's just simply saying, let's do an evidence-based test designed to allow the guard to make time or make his own observations. So again, as I said earlier, Daniel's goal was not only avoiding entanglement with the foreign false Babylonian gods, but even more so, Daniel wanted to demonstrate the reality of the one true God. And how did he try to do that to the guard? By giving him an evidence-based test that would speak to him. That would speak to him. Not, he didn't say, hey, I snuck out from Judah with my little pocket Gideon's Bible, which didn't exist, by the way. And why don't you read this for a while? No, he didn't try that. He didn't have the scriptures with him, I don't think, at least at that point. He was largely treated as a slave at that point. And so he dealt with the guard on a level that he could understand. And he's calling him, though, really to not only test and see what power this food has, it's a test about are your gods really gods? Or is there a superior one true God? And Daniel's saying, I claim that there is. So one thing that I think is helpful if you're either you're a believer, a follower of Jesus, and you're interacting with people, this is a great question to ask. Or if you're not a follower of Jesus yet and you're still thinking about things, this is a great question for you to consider. So have you ever considered calling out to God and ask him to show himself to you? Ask him to show or reveal whether he's really there. That's a great question just to ask. And if God's there, believe he'll answer the question. He would love to show himself. He may surprise you in the way he does it. And it may be, the way, like for me, the way he really showed himself to me was in three big ways. One was the love and acceptance and relational pursuit of college students my age who took a genuine interest in me. And that was different than the other people that I hung out with and partied with. We had fun together, but there wasn't a whole lot of, I really want to get to know you. Like, what are you about? No, everybody was really about themselves, getting what they want. So it was relational, and then it was also me getting into and having access to read the book of Matthew, and I started to become attractive to the person of Jesus as described there. And then thirdly, the other convincing piece for me was starting to read and study some evidence about the reliability of the Bible, evidence for the existence of God. And that was persuasive to me. But the whole time, I wasn't saying it exactly this way, but pretty dang close. No one told me to do this, but I was kind of inside my head like, this is a major change I'm considering, God. So, and it's going to have, I can tell it's going to have some implications on things I do or don't do and what I give my life to probably. So like, if you're there, let me know. And if you're not, then I guess you won't let me know because you're not there. No risk question. Lennox says this, and this is on the topic of us having patience if we're believers interacting with people. There is a simple but important lesson here in the way Daniel relates to people in power or just people around him who are opposed to him and his God. Daniel took time. He was not in a frantic hurry, and he was sensitive to others' need for space. We sometimes forget that the Christian message is very strange and new to many people. Oh my goodness. When I first heard the message and understood what the message was, it's like, so you're wanting me to believe there is a God for sure. Okay, I can kind of get there, that there's some creative power out there because something doesn't come from nothing, and that's really hard to describe otherwise. I can kind of get there. But then moving on into this God became a man 2,000 years ago, a poor dude named Jesus who came from Nazareth. Oh, and he was born to a virgin, by the way, so a real unusual birth. And then this guy lived a perfect life. He was God and man. He lived a perfect life, and then he died on a cross, and that death paid the penalty for my sins, which I don't even know if I believe, but sin's a thing yet. And then 3 days later, that's all right. We're already in la goofball land, by the way, at that point for me. And then you're telling me 3 days later, this same dude rose from the dead? Sorry, I can't just accept this right now. I need to think about this. It's crazy to the person who's not heard it before or examined and thought through the claims. Now, of course, I don't think it's crazy anymore. I think it's incredibly awesome how God chose to move towards us, how he gave evidence for obviously Jesus' existence, but also for his resurrection, etc. And so I don't think it's crazy anymore, but I needed time to deal with that stuff. Christianity, the Christian message, back to Lennox's quote here, right after the underline. The Christian message contains ideas with which they are not familiar, and we need to give them space to assimilate them. It is so easy by the sheer quantity of our arguments. So sometimes what's needed is to engage in discussion, argument, evidence, looking at all that. But sometimes and oftentimes, and I've been guilty of it now that I am a follower of Christ, just overloading people, like back the dump truck up and just dump the whole dang thing on them. And that is not helpful, hardly ever. People can only digest so much at a time. So by sheer quantity, it's so easy by the sheer quantity of our arguments to make interested people feel that they are being crowded out. They don't have space to think. So we got to give people space to breathe, or we shall only put them off. And the fault will be ours, not theirs. Great quote. It speaks to what Daniel did throughout the book, but with the guard here. So the guard agreed with Daniel and his friends about this, and he tested these guys for 10 days. Why did he agree? We don't know. He was curious. He had seen that Daniel and his friends were different than the others around them, maybe like I did with guys around me in college. I don't know. For whatever reason, though, he agreed to this test. And I would just put this here, and this is, notice I do say most people, not all people, but most people are actually fairly reasonable, I find. If we give them time, if possible, build relationship with them, and then we share, if you're a believer, sharing how God has changed your life, and then maybe offer one thing for them to consider. I mean, there's several people in this room with whom at one point you weren't yet a believer. You weren't yet at least really following after God. And with you, I know several of you guys, it started off with us, hey, let's read the Gospel of John. You don't have to believe it. Our goal is just to read it and understand what it says about Jesus and about what he's asking of you. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to do it. but let's just read it and try to understand it. Several of you agreed to do that, and several of you who will watch this later agreed to do that. For some of you, it was, hey, there's this real short book called Discovering God that was written by a guy who used to be an atheist, hippie, pot smoking, drug dealing convict, who now is very much a leader for God. But he wrote this book for people who are like him, like he used to be. It's got evidence for the existence of God. In fact, they're free. They're back. There's several copies back there on the back table. So for some of you, we sat down and we started to read through that. And I know several of you have done that with others in this room and outside of this room. And it's an invitation to, because of a relationship oftentimes, to explore something that most people really actually do want to explore. Some of the most hostile guys that I've interacted with, when I really get to know them, and then I say, one thing, obviously, I'm a pastor, so I'm kind of sometimes have an inroad, whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but at least the conversation comes up about God pretty quick. And it's like, one thing I love to do with people is to read the Bible or to look at the evidence, and would you be interested in doing that? And person after person that I would have predicted, they're like, no way, dude. Can we just be friends and not bring that in? But person after person has said, yeah, I've always wondered what the Bible really said. Or I've tried to read the Bible. It's so dang confusing. And so people are amenable to they're open to it. But we've got to be wise. All right, enough about that. 15, verse 15. At the end of 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating all that choice food and drinking all that choice wine. And that leads me to wonder something that we just don't know. Maybe the guard overseeing Daniel and his homies will be in heaven, and we'll get to have this conversation with him later. But I just wonder what types of conversations that this led to between Daniel and this guard. We don't know. He stuck his neck out. So the guard continued, though. He was convinced, and he continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. The indication is for the whole 3-year span of their training before they were to be presented to the king. Next verse. God gave these 4 young men, Daniel and his friends, knowledge and understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. Daniel also understood visions and dreams of every kind, and the rest of the book of Daniel will highlight that multiple times. So they understood every kind of literature and wisdom. That means they not only understood God's word, the portion of the Old Testament they had up to that time, what we would call the Old Testament, but they became very knowledgeable in all the Babylonian literature. Daniel and his friends excelled, you could put it this way, they excelled in the University of Babylon. And they mastered the knowledge from that worldview. They didn't say, oh, that's evil, get it away from us. They mastered it. They became highly proficient. They understood it better, as we'll see in a second, than all of the other trainees. But here's the key. They understood it, they mastered it, they were able to recite it, whatever, understood how it fit together, but they were not mastered by this knowledge and worldview. That is a super key thing to think about. We all seek to live, if you're a follower of Christ, to live in this world, but not be of this world, not take on this world's values and view of reality. Reading on for the sake of time. At the end of the time that the king had said to present them, so it's 3 years, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar, the king. The king interviewed them, and among all of them, no one was found equal. So the chief official, there's no indication he knows they've been just eating vegetables and drinking water this whole time. Maybe he knew eventually, but it doesn't say he does. But he gets to be the one to present them. And there was no one who was equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they began to serve in the king's court in every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted them about. He found them 10 times better than all the diviner priests and mediums in his entire kingdom. So the way to even move forward, now don't take this as a promise, by the way. I think this was something that happened in this unique circumstance to highlight There is one true God, the God that Daniel and his friends follow. But in every matter, they were 10 times better than all the chief priests, all the diviner priests, and the mediums in his entire kingdom. So they moved up in status in Babylonian society. They moved up in trust with the king. And also, by the way, that chief official who wasn't willing to stick his neck out, guess what? He got a good deal of credit too. Well, you're a great trainer of young men. But he maybe had nothing to do with it. That's okay. It's okay. Daniel is playing the long game and is there. God has placed him there, allowed him and his friends to be there to represent the one true God in a culture hostile to God. And by the way, Daniel and his friends, verse 21, remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. That's a long time, by the way. There's actually no indication that Daniel and his friends ever served their time in Babylon and then went home. They remained faithful witnesses for God in a culture opposed to him their whole life, from roughly 15 on. And God showed up again and again and again and again in the midst of difficulties they faced in this hostile culture. So what are the big takeaways from today? There could be a lot of them. Let me just highlight a few. We need to think through the foundation and fruit of worldviews. That's what I've been trying to put before us the last several weeks. It's not just intellectual exercise. Everything else flows out of that. Why do we believe what we believe about the world? Political policy comes from world views. Period. It did 2,700 years ago, and it will in 270 days from now. It is going to come from worldviews. So we need to understand worldviews and be able to interact with people on that level. Living for we see from Daniel, it requires a conscious choice. It requires courageous action, not just sitting back, removed, and critiquing, but getting into the fray and interacting with real people relationally. And as we try to share, if you're a Christian, if you try to share, fulfill your mission, sharing with others about Jesus, we've got to allow people space, got to allow time for people to consider these strange ideas. They'll be strange to them, for sure. And God shows up as we take a risk and invite others to investigate his claims, his truth. Yeah, and by the way, the point of this passage, just to make sure you don't pull this away, that is not that God will elevate us to positions of power and influence if we do the right things. That happened for Daniel and his friends, and it might happen to some of you. But it was a stewardship that was entrusted to them so that they could make known the one true God. And we'll see in the book of Daniel, even to Nebuchadnezzar himself. Nebuchadnezzar changes. He at least accepts that there is one true God by the time of the book's end, or the end of his life. So yeah, and finally, the last big takeaway, and then we'll open it up for some comments. Like Daniel, a Christian's goal is not only to avoid the bad stuff, avoid false gods, but even more so, our goal given by God is to demonstrate the reality of the one true God, to be witnesses for what Christ has done so that we could have a relationship with him. Daniel embodied that before he knew what the Messiah would be like, what the Savior of the world would be like. And he did it in way, way, way more hostile territory than we are in. If you start whining in your head, just read Daniel for a little bit. It'll help you see, oh, wow, we don't have it so bad. Next week, we're going to look again from Daniel. We're going to look at reason, revelation, and reward, just as Daniel interacts with the king and his visions, and God starts to make his case to King Nebuchadnezzar himself. So what questions or comments do you have on this teaching? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right there.